Hey everyone, Harry here to talk about Merrick Garland's testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee. It was a pretty long affair, 4 hours. He was up there fielding questions from a committee that is divided, but slightly more Democrats, but it was the Republicans who threw the high, hard ones and tried to score points. Really not against Garland. These are such theatrical affairs where, especially the side on the other guys, in this case, the Republicans, and especially these Republicans who can be so ideological and polemical, they ask stupid questions, in a word, not meant to trip Garland up, but just meant to score points with whomever, the Fox News crowd, the MAGA crowd, their own home base, but they, press him and act aggressive and act, tough, and it's all part of their talking points about the deep state and the Department of Justice. And, Garland was very well prepared. No surprise there. I've actually seen him get ready for hearings with, binders up to here. And there was no question that took him by surprise. And he handled it all. And, with nary a pushback, there was one or two times where he bristled a bit. Actually, I'll start there. So, it's old news now. There was a memo that was responded to a letter to the department from a national teacher organization saying things are getting pretty hot and heated and crazy at school board meetings, and they certainly are, where groups are showing up, largely sort of MAGA type groups, screaming about different things. And there were some reports of violence at some of them, and school board officials being threatened, etc. And after getting this letter, there was a memo from that Garland signed off on, saying, if there's violence, we're empowered to get involved. Nothing much has ever happened with it, but it's been this great talking point for Republican senators to say, the nanny state DOJ is looking to arrest parents who are just, concerned about their children's curriculum and exposure to, terrible books like ones that talk about, say, race studies or, different to them sort of newfangled woke texts of the sort that DeSantis is so flamboyantly fighting. So anyway, Garland's there with a little bit of pushback or frustration, said, this memo has now come up 3 times. So I hope that you can tell your colleagues, or tell people the right explanation now that you've heard it again. But it was essentially, we never would target parents and their concern for their children's education. But of course, if things get violent, et cetera, et cetera. All right. Speaking of violence, he fielded questions from Mike Lee and Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz might be the worst of them all in terms of asking total and name questions that he knows the answer to just to score points. But the basic suggestion there is that to contrast what they argued was the department's failure to arrest people who were protesting in front of justices of the Supreme Court's homes, and even one that threatened, as you might remember, Justice Kavanaugh, following the overruling of Roe versus Wade, as supposedly contrasted with their zeal for going after and locking up anti-abortion protesters. So Garland calmly set the record straight on the anti-abortion protest. There was one, and they were only talking about one prosecution in Pennsylvania. And it was a guy who was like a terrorist targeting abortion providers and the like. So totally appropriate for federal law enforcement. And on the justices, he actually got some heat. You've done nothing. You've done nothing. And he could say calmly that actually for the first time ever, the Department of Justice dispatched 70 law enforcement officers, marshals largely, I think, to the homes of the justices to make sure everything was safe. And there was one instance where maybe a disreputable character passed by. In fact, it was because the officers deterred the guy from doing anything, and he later was learned that he was looking potentially to threaten justice. Anyway, so the idea of some kind of what they were trying to get at is, I guess, you're a Democrat, you like Roe v. Wade, they overruled it and you're not protecting, whereas you like abortionists and you don't like anti-abortion protesters and you go after that, and just absurd, risible, and they know it, but just a way to try to score points. So he played, Cruz in particular played his part, and Garland played his calm, judicious, part back. Hunter Biden, what would a committee oversight hearing be without Hunter Biden? And he faced flack from a couple directions about Hunter Biden. He took a hypothetical, actually, which said if there's a family member who's like getting paid off by a foreign government to try to get influence, would that be a problem? And and that's something you might have expected him to just say, look, it's a hypothetical, or I'm not sure what I don't want to comment on any pending cases. Instead, he said, yep, that would be a problem. And he could be fairly straightforward with Hunter Biden, because the main point, and he, emphasized it again, is he has he's completely letting the U.S. attorney, a Trump holdover, held over for this very reason, David Kelly from Delaware, do whatever he wants with the Hunter Biden investigation, said he'd give him all the resources he needed, etc. And he said, I've kept my pledge, which was during his confirmation to be hands off there, give him all he needs. On the Hunter Biden thing, by the way, so we're now talking, an extra few years of investigation, and there's still nothing. You gotta wonder if it's a dry well, and when the U.S. attorney might be closing up shop, or what exactly he's trying to do. Antitrust comes up a bit. They probably don't know this, but Garland knows antitrust. He did it a lot in private practice. He wrote an article for either Harvard or Yale on antitrust, and it was in the context of Taylor Swift and Ticketmaster. And I don't know antitrust law, but I know what I like, and it ain't Ticketmaster somehow. And I think that would be like a villain now, up there with, maybe Twitter or ISIS or whatever. Anyway, there's an investigation going on, and Garland was able to, talk about that intelligently, of course. Okay, those were the main kind of pushbacks from Republicans. They, as I say, were about talking points, not real substance. And he was, 4-hour hearings, a long time in that chair, but he handled it fine. He also got some incoming from Democrats, and that's fine and appropriate. And if it weren't such a polarized time, you'd expect it. But first, Senator Durbin asked him about fentanyl. And Garland said, look, it is a terrible, terrible plague, and it's because Mexican cartels are trying to import it into the U.S., trying to kill people with it. It's a terrible story. In fact, we did an episode, if they're talking feds, longtime listeners out there, a few months back, on fentanyl. I think I'll post it again based on what he had to say, but we're talking about record numbers of deaths from overdoses last year, 2/3 of which were from fentanyl. 70,000 deaths from fentanyl, the single largest cause of death for all adults in the United States ages 18 to 44. and so hard to get at for a number of reasons. And they're covered actually really well in this episode, which I will now post. So you can look for it on my Twitter feed and Talking Fed's Twitter feed. But anyway, that came up, and he didn't try to puff or deny the gravity of the problem, and was just very emphatic about saying they are working it super hard. And Senator Whitehouse had an interesting back and forth where he tried to push Garland to depublish some of these OLC memos that we heard about in the recent years. For example, the OLC memo that says you can't indict the president. The OLC memo that takes a very aggressive stance on testimonial immunity. And Whitehouse makes the good point that, you do these memos, and since they bind you, no one ever tests things in court because you don't take action where it's based on it. Won't you undo some of these? And Garland said, no. He said, if specific doctrines been overturned or holdings by a court or a court of appeals, okay, that's one thing. If the court of appeals holds, but when would it ever even have occasion to do it? Because the only people who would bring up a prosecution of a pending president would be DOJ, and they won't do it if the policy holds. But be that as it may, if a court ever holds against an OLC opinion, that's one thing. But if it's just that it's being criticized or it seems dubious, well, that happens all the time. So he said he wouldn't commit to decertifying some of those. And those are the highlights. He parried anything, of course, about Jack Smith. And he, again, was very hands-off about Hunter Biden. So those are the items that are most sort of in the current news. All in all, a pretty sleepy affair, which is exactly what you want if you're Merrick Garland. And when the temperature was raised, it was just on the questioner's side by Republicans, just looking to get talking points or score things for constituents. But it makes it a little harder when the person who's taking the questions doesn't really give you much, doesn't really, get his hackles up or his shoulders. There's not much. You can do the question, but there's, not too much in the answer. Anyway, he sailed through fine. Excellent job. Not surprised by anything. Handled some stupid and tendentious questions, but mainly just very politely. And that's that story. It'll be a different story if and when he testifies in front of the House Judiciary Committee, where there are so many nasty kind of snipers lying in wait. But for now, he goes home. Merrick Garland goes home and oversees the Smith investigation. We did another, by the way, YouTube today about something it turns out he was very involved in. It might explain some of the delays in the prosecutions of and investigations of Trump, but check it out. It's a pretty outrageous story involving the FBI resisting taking, obviously appropriate investigative moves against Trump. By the way, if you're liking these tapes, we'd really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe. Helps us out a lot. And that's the story now on the Judiciary Committee and Merrick Garland. Until the next time, talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.